gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Director of Talking Eyes Media and producer and director of Bring It to the Table, Julie Winokur.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here. I just want to take a moment to thank the Detroit Chamber. This is really an honor. I'm actually a New Jersey resident. I'm a Jersey girl in the flesh. This is what it looks like. But I do have Michigan connections. I actually am a Wolverine. I went to Ann Arbor. And I always have to laugh because when I got to Michigan, and in those days there were not nearly as many East Coasters who showed up on your doorstep. But when I got there, of course, I learned that when you ask somebody from Michigan, they do that thing, like, where are you from? I'm from there. And then I had to say, you know, when they'd ask me, where are you from? And I'd have to say, I'm from here. So unfortunately, I do come from a state that has a reputation that leaves much to be desired. But that's not why I'm here today. I just had to share that because I do feel a kindred spirit, and my daughter's at Michigan now, so the tradition continues. I'm here to talk to you about a project called Bring It to the Table. So my slide does not seem to, there it is, excellent. Bring It to the Table is a project that I launched 5 years ago. Now, I am the founding director of a media company. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I started out as a print journalist and transitioned into making documentary films. And I founded my company 15 years ago as an antidote to what I saw going on in the media. I felt that the media was contributing to the problems in society more than I felt it was resolving those problems or being part of the solution. So I set up Talking Eyes Media as a way to do deep, long-form reporting on topics that I felt needed to be addressed, and to do so as a nonprofit media company, which I don't know why I thought that was a good idea, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. But I felt that the only way to be able to do this sort of long-form, in-depth, documentary-style work was going to be as a nonprofit where I could get public support. I could get foundation support. I also had a very clear mission that I wanted to put my media to work, that it wasn't good enough to make a film and have it broadcast. And I've done that, and that's all well and good. I don't mean to belittle that. But it was clear to me at the time that broadcast was almost just like a way to market what you'd made. But it wasn't a way to make social change happen. So I set out to actually create media that I felt could be put into service. And I tell you all of that because this project, Bring It to the Table, is in that model in terms of accessing the power of visual media to change minds. So 5 years ago, my son, who was 17 at the time, told me that I was the most politically intolerant person he'd ever met. Does anybody here have a teenage kid? I bet you are the most politically intolerant person, not me, at least in your household. But it was a comment that really stopped me in my tracks. I have earned my living and built my reputation on my ability to be fair, to recount stories that are true to the people who share them with me and give me the honor of sharing those stories. And I do interviews regularly. So I see myself as somebody who knows how to have conversations and knows how to listen and knows how to really understand all sides of a situation so I can fairly report it back. So having my 17-year-old call me out was really a bummer, a supreme bummer. And it was clearly true enough that it like stuck a little craw in me that said, I wonder if he's right. I wonder if he's right. So I decided I would take on the challenge. And I decided at that point that I was going to do something that I would like to call radical civility. And I'm going to share with you an excerpt, just a brief trailer from the film that I produced, Bring It to the Table, which will give you a good sense of what that radical civility looked like. So if we could cue up the film, I'd love to share that trailer.
We were watching, I believe it was Fox News, a reporter who had definitely conservative views, and everything he said you would just shoot down. So I called you intolerant because I felt like you should listen to the other side and at least hear what they have to say.
I guess this is more a journey of trying to figure out what do people truly believe.
As far as I'm concerned, the role of government should be to ensure our civil liberties.
How can you possibly support a party that doesn't support you?
I knew I was a conservative long before I knew that I was gay.
I do baptize you, Brother Kevin McPherson, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
I believe you just need to know His word. I don't need to legislate God's word on you.
Folks have said in the past to me at other places, well, politics and religion should not mix. But I contend that it should.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the values, the beliefs behind these choices.
I was raised on welfare.
You'll ever explain your point of view to me and it still sounds dumb as hell. Sorry.
What is the actual demand of this group?
Will he be the president that has deported the most people in U.S. history? For that, we are risking arrest.
What happens is when you actually listen, there's that dangerous possibility it might change your mind.
Jesus Christ, you guys are going to die and wind up in hell, and you think because you're in America...
If we could come to the table and say, we both want what's best, and then fight like crazy with each other over what the best way to get there is, we could still get up from the table as friends. So where Democrats may get it right, I think, is their love for the country as much as we do. We should give each other credit for that. Whether or not we agree with what a perfect America looks like, that's what we should be fighting over.
So that's what radical civility looks like. I actually set off on a journey across the United States with a small table. My table will actually be at the session tomorrow morning. If anybody is an early riser, it's at 7:30 in the morning. But I traveled with a small table. And I invited people to sit down and talk politics. So when my son had said to me, if the other side had a good idea, you wouldn't even know it because you weren't listening. That was the moment of reckoning for me. Because at the time, and again, this is 5 years ago, I was upset, like many people in the country, with the partisanship, with the paralysis in Washington, with the extreme brinksmanship that was taking place to the detriment of the American public. And what I saw at that time, what I felt strongly in my gut, is that people were putting party before country. And that this whole political machine had become something other than public service. These were no longer public servants. You know, what we were looking at was people looking out for self-interest and hunkering down to support their team at the expense of everything. And I was amongst many people who were pointing fingers saying, those people are a problem. Those people are stopping anything from getting done. And when my son called me out, it was the moment where I had to say, what about this person? I am no better than the people in DC who are unwilling and incapable of listening to ideas they don't agree with. So I felt that it was my duty as a citizen to set out and actually become a better version of myself. And I'm here today, and I believe the reason I was invited is that I would like to task every single one of you in this room with becoming that better citizen. Because we clearly are not being led from the top down right now in terms of modeling the kind of country we would like to be part of. We are not witnessing problem solving. We're witnessing something else, which is obstructionism. So I believe firmly in my soul that we need to build the movement from the ground up. This is technically a participatory democracy. And how many people sit by, point fingers, complain, are not educated enough about what's going on, and place blame? So this is about personal agency. This is very much about what can I do? And I might not be, as a mom from New Jersey, I may not be the person who gets to influence Congress, but I certainly can influence my community. I can influence my family. I influence my workplace. I influence in a magnitude of ways. So if I can be that less partisan person within my community and within my family, then I am the beginning of that change. So I don't see this moment where everybody is thinking that we're at a juncture that somehow popped up overnight. I have to tell you, 5 years ago I started this. I cannot tell you how many people have come out of the woodwork since November 8th and said, your project is more important than ever. How did you know? Wow, you were really ahead of the curve. I said, no, I had my eyes and my ears open. We had a problem years ago, which is why we are here today. So the question is, what kind of personal agency can every one of us take to be more civil in the way we operate? What I ended up doing with the project is I finished this 40-minute film, and then I started to go out and do public presentations with the film. I had interviewed 125 people during my cross-country road trip. I was able to piece together a series of table talks that were issue-based, and I brought together voices from the road who were actually having a civil conversation even though they had never been in the same room together. So I was able to construct what a civil conversation looks like. And we then ended up running those on NBC News around the time of the previous presidential election. So that was the immediate out the door. And all of a sudden, there started to be a buzz about this concept. Now, what did I do? If you break it down, I basically had a table, right? And I talked. But more importantly, I listened. And the whole message that I put out was, I needed to learn how to listen. We all need to learn how to listen. So on the road, the most profound comment somebody made to me was, in America, our idea of listening is waiting for the other person to stop speaking. So true. And I'll own it. I was that person. So it made me have to change the way I listened. In the course of these table talks that I was doing, I also learned that I had to approach the conversation with a completely different spirit. Because I had set out to listen, it meant that I just kept asking questions in the spirit of trying to understand. There's a radical thought. I wasn't actually asking questions so I could prove somebody wrong or push back on what they said. And I heard a lot of things at the table, true and false, people who were informed, people who knew nothing. But everybody has an opinion about things, and we speak with a certain degree of authority about those things. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I was not sitting with James Comey when he was making decisions about Hillary's emails. But I and many other people start talking about these kinds of big issue topics as though we have an expertise. I am no expert on the federal deficit, and yet I get talking, you would think I was an economist. So I realized also that I was speaking with a level of authenticity that I wasn't actually privileged to. So it made me have to stop and also think about the way that I speak about my own knowledge base. So what are you an expert in? You think about it for a moment. What are you the expert in that you can really speak to? You're the expert in the experiences you've had. You are the expert of you. And you may be the expert in your profession, that you can speak to that issue. But think about how often you talk about political topics with a level of rhetoric expertise that is not founded in true expertise. So it's owning also that responsibility of engaging in a political conversation from a place that's based on what you really know, not what you read third party. And how often do we do that when we enter these kinds of conversations? We enter with a set idea about what the truth is, but we haven't explored where that came from and why. So I even, I have these kinds of incidents all the time where I have to now put myself in check. I stop myself sometimes and I say, I'm talking about something I really don't know anything about. I just read it somewhere. It's almost like that ad, like I'm not a doctor, but I played one on TV, right? But we all do that in our small ways. We make these kind of minor infractions on a daily basis. I ended up with this film going out on the road and sharing the film. And then one day, several months into showing the film, I was showing it at B&H, is a huge photo store in New York, and they had invited me. And I figured they invited me because there'd be a bunch of nerds, camera nerds there who want to know what we shot with, what we edited with, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm having this conversation, and I had my table there, and I thought on a whim, why don't I just see if I can get a volunteer from the audience to sit up here and do a table talk? And so I chatted for a bit, and I had a volunteer come up, and New Yorkers love to talk, by the way. So I had this person come up, sit, and talk in front of an audience, just like this. And then after we did this mini demo of a table talk, I then started talking more about the project, and then a hand went up. And I said, yes. And it was a fellow who said, are you going to have more volunteers? Because I really want to come up. Really? You want to come up? And everybody's head started to shake. And I realized that I was onto something, that actually people really want to be having these kinds of conversations, but they don't get the opportunity. They don't get the opportunity to be heard, first and foremost. And a lot of the methodology that I use is about how do you invite the conversation? How do you open the door that says, I am here to understand you, not to prove what I know, what I believe. And even when somebody says something that really gets my hackles up. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Arlie Hochschild, a fantastic sociologist who's done a lot of work in this field, and she said when you feel that happening, you have to figure out how to dismantle your alarm system. So that's something I take to heart. How do I dismantle my alarm system when my beliefs are being challenged? And in dismantling that alarm system, I've recognized, too, that the least effective way to have a civil conversation is to do one of two things. Just basically treat someone like they're stupid, or to say you're wrong. You are never going to convince somebody or enlighten anybody unless you approach the conversation in that spirit of help me understand you. One of the things that I do, as you noticed in the film, I have this small flower on the table. I call that my weapon of choice. It's in the center of the table, and I begin every conversation by asking people, if this is conservative and this is liberal, where are you on that spectrum? It is the first time most people have ever been asked to identify where they stand politically within an infinite space, within an infinite choice. And it is a moment of pause for every single person who sits at that table. And they say, well, by what definition? By just with that? And I say, just with that. Conservative, liberal, where are you on that spectrum? If in your mind right now, how would you answer that question? And I'm asking every one of you, because I think that we've reduced this idea of partisanship down to something so simplistic that every one of us in this room would have a hard time answering that question without having to really self-examine for a moment. So we walk around and we say, oh, I'm a liberal, I'm a conservative. What does that mean to you? And how liberal and how conservative are you? The thing that I learned at the table as well is just how complex every single person who has sat there has been. And one of the questions I ask everybody who's with me is, where has your opinion changed? And in that question is this searching for transformation. Transformation equals growth. And most of us have some issue that we either struggle with or that we've changed our minds about, which is really the portal to breaking down the hyperpartisanship that we're experiencing right now. So I feel that that transformation question is incredibly critical. I ended up then going on the road, continuing to travel. In the last year, I've probably been at 50 different communities doing these live table talk sessions. I have yet to be in a situation where nobody volunteers to come up. I've reached a point where I get invited to come in and talk very issue specifically. So recently, I was invited to Valparaiso in Indiana, Valparaiso University. So we have a Lutheran school, and they called me up, and they said, we really want you to come. And I said, OK, great. Well, my table talks, we'll pick a topic together, and we'll explore something. What do you think the Lutheran University asked me to come talk about? Reproductive rights. I almost dropped the phone. I was like, you want me to come in and talk about reproductive rights on campus? Interesting. And they said to me, it's because we feel like it's so hard for people to have an honest conversation about it. People care so passionately, they're unable to speak about it. So my next step, in addition to doing these, I've been doing trainings on college campuses with students. I've been engaging with faculty. We had this at Texas Christian University, police, law enforcement as well. And the next thing I'm hoping to do at University of Michigan in the fall is a 10-table event so that we can actually make this much more of a public display. And in that public display, I feel that we have the opportunity to seize that commitment to being those better citizens and to saying it is unacceptable where we have arrived. But that isn't, this is not the end of days that we're sitting in right now. This is the opportunity. Things have to get bad to get better. This is that moment. And this is your moment. So I'm going to ask that everyone here, in the next week, does a random act of civil discourse. Totally serious. I'm asking you that you will approach a conversation with someone you don't agree with a different spirit, in a spirit of inquiring and understanding. And I don't mean you need to agree. This is not a kumbaya project where we're all going to get along and be happy and be on the same page. We won't. And quite frankly, actually that to me is dishonest. Complete agreement, that's the death knell of innovation. It's the death knell of democracy. So I'm going to ask that you practice that act of a random act of civil discourse, and you're going to do it where your voice is less important in that conversation. But you're going to learn a new level of understanding with your hands open. And that says, help me understand you. I disagree, but help me understand you. So now you've got homework. Thank you very much.